years older than.
And then uncle was?
Uncle was he was
Three?
three and a half years older than me.
And then your younger brother?
Younger brother was 2 years below, another 2 years, another 2 years, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And even though we were not rich by any means, the life was okay. You know, we're not starving or anything, and all the kids were going to school, and the boys were all three, including me, were very academically all outstanding in the class. Sister wasn't that bright. Somehow she was a very outgoing girl, but academically she didn't get the good scores. Or so then my 1940, when my age was about 5 or 6, Second World War was starting, and from then on there was there's turmoil. Even though the fighting was in our soil, but the Japanese was dominating Korea, ruling Korea.
Mm-hmm.
Korea was
Occupied
and absorbed into Japan. So the Japanese complete control of whole Korea, economically, politically, everything, and they try to assimilate.
Are you talking about before the war or during the war or both?
Before. This is Japan occupied Korea in 1910.
Yeah.
So it's been about 20 years, and they just really work hard to assimilate and try to eradicate the Korean roots. So they even changed our family names into Japanese. So our name became Takashima.
Oh, really?
Takashima. Okay.
How did they choose? Just
no. Takashima means high island. Our Korean name is Ko. Ko is high, right? So they gave that much freedom. Okay, you can pick names, whatever you want, but it's has to be Japanese name.
Was there other ways that you found that the Japanese affected your life, or was it more not really a immediate effect on you?
That point wasn't, but we were all forced to use Japanese language in school. If you get caught using Korean in school, you demeritated and so on. And by the time I entered school, the war was getting hot, and then they tried to militarize the atmosphere and so on. So then on my mother's side, the grandfather was a small store owner, okay? and he had 5. I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 children, and again that grandfather again had 2 wives. My mother was born from first wife, and there were 2 boy and girl was born from second wife. Again, I don't know, first wife died from what, and then I remember the second grandmother, even though she was now my grandmother, because my mother was not her child, but she was, we treated her as grandmother, and she treated us grandkid. The oldest of the children, there was a man, boy, and my mother was a second girl. That man was a very prominent man grew into. He was a revolutionary.
Your mother's older brother?
Yeah. I think 2 years older than my.
Do you remember his name?
Yeah, his name is Chung Yum-soo, and he was a physically very imposing big man, and he was, as I said, revolutionary.
Do you know when your mother was born? What year?
Oh, she was born 1906, 4 years younger than my father.
And so you think her brother was maybe 2 years older than
Yeah.
her?
So that time, the revolutionary means anti-Japanese activists. He tried to organize. His area of this activity was organizing the farmers, okay, and making. So he organized this demonstrations on farmers, stand up, and so he the authority was track him down, and then he was eventually he was sent to jail for several years, and I remember he was very dignified looking big man, and later, after Japan was defeated in North Korea, he became very high-ranking government officer. And
do you remember him being around a lot, your family, when you were young?
Yeah, but for me, that time it was maybe 5, 6, 7 year old. And he was a sort of unapproachable. He was, and I was scared of him,
Yeah, sure.
sort of.
Yeah.
And I remember if I visit his house. He lived with his parents, the older parents, a small store, a front, store. In his room in the back, a small room. On the wall, there was a Karl Marx portrait. On the wall.
Yeah, he's a farmer, organizer of farmers. Yeah.
Yeah, he was a communist.
Yeah, right, sure.
And So back to my schooling. So 1945, when the Second World War ended, Japan defeated, Korea, liberated, and everybody. That time, my age was 10 or 11 years old, 10 years old. Still remember people were, screaming, that long live Korea, and that they were that really, and they really, the population really hated the Japanese, the cops and this operatives, the politicians and so on.
So you're remembering, like, this is VJ Day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember that. Yeah, it was for a couple of days, every day was that they were demonstrating.
Did the police or the Japanese just suddenly leave or
Just disappeared.
disappeared? Yeah.
And there was some, Korean collaborators to Japanese police and so on. They were tracked down and or stoned to death, and there was all kind of things happening. And then soon after there were.
This is all even in your town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Russian soldiers came in. They, the Russians occupied North Korea, and U.S. Army at the 38th parallel. So I was third grade at elementary school when it's liberated, and suddenly we started learning Korean language and the Korean alphabet, and started learning Korean songs and
For the first time.
Right.
I think I remember you telling me that uncle spoke or still knew Japanese because he was old enough to.
Oh yeah, he was fifth grade or sixth grade,
Yeah.
Sixth grade. So yeah, they spoke pretty good in Japanese, but I was third grade, so I still remember some words, but not fluent at all.
And that maybe uncle had a more bitterness towards the Japanese than you did, or.
I don't know. His that time what his he was as I said, he was a very bright student. Second uncle, my oldest brother was very sort of introverted, not that outgoing type of person. He was eventually he went to Pyongyang engineering school. He studied material engineering in material. But the second brother was when he went to middle school. That was 1943, I think. Still Japanese. That time, it was like that Korean boys, Korean young men, after finishing school, best job was becoming a teacher. Okay, and it's very guaranteed, well-paid occupation. So this normal school, the teacher's school, was the top choice. All these brightest boys from the elementary school wanted to go there. So he went to that.
Where?
In Hamhung normal school, they call it that time. So when the war...
Is that the name of the school?
Yeah, Hamhung Normal School, Hamhung teacher's school. And when war ended, he was third grade or fourth grade, and he started realizing that he was a pretty bright and progressive boy, and realized that now Korea is now independent. Teachers doesn't have that much future in there. He wanted to be, he wanted to go to a regular high school, and he was starting being rebellious, and he had a hard time. The government policy was they needed teachers, so they don't want to these boys leave the so he had he could not go to regular school, and yet he didn't want to stay in this, so he had this dilemma, and then he quit school. He didn't want to go. Okay. So eventually, 1947, 48, at his age 17, he ran away to Seoul. That time, in the border between North and South Korea, it was sort of porous, so you can smuggle or sneak through. So he went to Seoul. And,
How do you think he went there on foot?
Yeah, but no, up to a certain point that he went on the train, and then last maybe 15, 20 miles.
Sort of through no man's land.
Right. Yeah, I think there were a lot of people doing that time. But I stayed in the north, and so from 1945 on, we started having North Korean communist education. Right?
Starting when?
1945,
Yeah.
after Second World War ended.
Just one question: when Uncle went to Seoul, did you still have communication with him through?
Yeah, we had
letters
the letters exchange, and also there were some unofficial trade going on, some private trades. So my father was helping some traders, and so he made a couple of trips to Seoul.
Oh, I see.
By ship all the way down to, and see, our hometown was very rich in the fishery. So dried fish was in demand in South Korea, so that was a big trade.
And the name of your hometown?
It's Hongwon. Hongwon. Yeah, it's very nice town, very good living town. It's half fishery and half agriculture. It's there was very nice place to live. And,
So you were saying that your father got a chance to visit Seoul on the boat.
right, couple of occasions.
And-
My brother managed to go high school there, and
As essentially an orphan, or did he have relatives that he was with?
there were some relatives, but the distant relatives.
But he was basically on his own.
On his own, he had a hard time, and on the other hand, I was in North Korea. I was going through elementary school and then middle school, and when I reached seventh grade, the Korean War was broke out. So,
Do you want to take a break?
okay, that much for this
Yes.
section.
Yeah,
You
sure.
did a lot of talking, that was very
Yes,
interesting, I was listening to what you
That
guys did.
section, yeah.
Yes,
Then,
right. I've heard most of it before, but like the fire and all that, I kinda,
yeah.
I don't remember all the,